Chapter 6 is on the nonverbal dimension of communication. I don't have any hard data on this, but I always find that this is one of the favorite topics in this course and in communication in general. I think we're always interested by nonverbal communication, and I think it's really such an important part of the conversation because it is a basis for so many ways that we communicate, whether we realize it or not. And it's also a big conversation because as we communicate more and more digitally, the discussion and the impact of nonverbal communication really comes to the forefront. Ways that we integrate nonverbal communication into our digital communication is a big area of interest, a big topic right now in the communication world. How are we communicating effectively when we're using digital tools more and more and more? We'll talk about that a little bit. But all of that to say, I think that this is a really fascinating discussion. I think it's something that we could spend a lot more time on. Other schools that I've taught at have an entire course on nonverbal communication because there's just so much to cover. So we're just kind of hitting the top highlights here. Nonverbal communication defined is pretty simple. It's all aspects of communication other than the words themselves. So the previous chapter was on verbal communication, where we talked about the impact of words and how words are made and how they are the collection of symbols that we assign meaning to. Nonverbal communication is everything else except those words. So this includes how we say words, our environments, objects, and other things of that nature. So this is how we do lots and lots of our communication. So just some simple examples before we really jump into them one by one. But if you think about if all that we ever did was text with no exclamation points, or with no emojis, with no stickers, with no GIFs, with no memes, with no videos. If all we ever did was text specifically, and all we ever did was talk to each other in a monotone voice with no changes in volume, with no changes in inflection, with no changes in tone, that would be, obviously our communication would be a minute fraction of what it actually is. So nonverbal communication is so much of what we do. So we may have discussed this a little bit in the in-person version of this class. We discussed this a little bit more, but it's come up probably at some point this semester. But what is more believable, the verbal communication or the nonverbal communication, and why do you think that is? So think about that for a second. If somebody is communicating with me and their verbal communication is saying one thing and their nonverbal communication is saying another thing, which one do we believe? Or do you know somebody who speaks really quickly without thinking about it? So maybe sometimes that verbal is more. Think about if somebody stops and thinks. What are they communicating just by stopping and thinking? So if these two things are in tension, what do we have a tendency to believe? So this is so I'll give you 30 seconds to stop and think about that, and I'll sort of prepare you for think about it this way: which is more voluntary, and which is more involuntary? Okay, so think about something like breathing. Okay, so we can control our breath, right? So you can hold your breath, you can breathe faster, you can breathe slower, you can do exercises to make your breathing better. You have control over your breath, but it's something that you do involuntarily. You don't have to think about your breath. Your body does it. Your body does it while it sleeps. Your body does it while you're doing something else. And yes, you can take that over and be intentional about how you do it, but it's really an involuntary function of your body. So then think about moving. Moving for the most part, not 100% of the time, but for the most part, is something that is chosen. I choose when I stand up and walk. I choose when I run or when I stop. I choose when so on and so forth. Now, again, sometimes you have like a knee-jerk reaction to something, like somebody throws something at you and your reaction is to jump out of the way, or something like that. But for the most part, moving is a voluntary action. It's something we decide how we're going to do it and when we're going to do it. So the analogy there is kind of like nonverbal communication is more like breathing. So it's something that we can control to an extent, our nonverbal communication. We can control our facial expression. We can control the volume that we're speaking at and the tone that we're speaking at. But much of it also happens involuntarily without you even realizing it. You are not consciously, constantly deciding on your nonverbal communication. It's something that largely happens in an involuntary way. Again, that's not to say that you can't make that decision, but it's a little bit of both. Verbal communication is a little more chosen. Now, that's not to say that we think through every single thing we say, and that we never say something in haste, or say, everybody, no matter what, has failed at their verbal communication at some point. You've said something wrong. You've said something that was hurtful without thinking about it, or just said something incorrect or whatever. You understand that this is not a 100%. One is always involuntary and one is always voluntary. But in large part, that nonverbal communication happens involuntarily. You're doing it subconsciously, or just without even really thinking about it at all. So what that means is that in general, not 100% every single time, but in general, the nonverbal element of communication tends to be a little bit more believable. So you're going to watch this week a video that's just below this, that somebody went and did it's a little bit older show, but if you've ever seen Friends, somebody, it seems like, did like a class project, or maybe a teacher that was teaching a lesson, and went and got a bunch of clips of Friends and pieced those famous clips from Friends together and talked about what nonverbals were at play in that. So if you've never seen Friends before, obviously there's going to be a little bit lack of context there, but you can still see it. And there's this famous scene of Ross telling Rachel and Joey that he's fine. And he says, I'm fine. And his voice keeps getting squeakier and squeakier. And he's I'm fine. And then he closes it by saying, I don't know why my voice is getting so squeaky. I'm fine. And he says it with that real low voice. That is a case of his nonverbal response did not match his verbal communication. He was saying he was fine, but it was very obvious based on his voice changing and squeaking and him having a lack of control of his volume and tone of voice and his pitch, that it was very obvious that he wasn't fine. So what's the more believable thing in that instance? In that instance, the more believable thing is the nonverbal communication. It's like if you're having a conversation with somebody and they are telling you one thing, but you can see a different thing on their face. Or you can see a different thing in their posture, or you can see a different thing in, the way they're not making eye contact with you, or things like that. We tend to believe that nonverbal communication even better, or even more so. So that's part of the reason that this is really important. So let's talk through some types of nonverbal communication. There are 9 listed here. It's not necessarily an all-encompassing list, but it's a pretty solid list here of the ways that we communicate non-verbally. So again, this is not words. This is everything else. And so we'll break down some of these types of nonverbal communication. But this is a good list to be working from, particularly as you work into your discussion board this week and things like this. So 9 things, and like I said, we'll break them down a little bit. Kinesics are body positions, body motions, facial expressions, and gestures. So think of the word kinesiology. Kinesiology is a study of body movement. If any of you are going into coaching or physical education or health and human performance, things like that, you're going to get a lot on kinesiology, the study of how we move. So take that same root word and bring it into communication, and we call it kinesics. Kinesics is, you can see the examples: waving, eye contact, smiling, frowning, angry eyes, kind eyes. You see the silly meme from Toy Story, I'm packing you your angry eyes, just in case, right? Just in case you need to be angry and use your eyes. So we oftentimes communicate with our body motion, with our body position, with our facial expression, and with our gesture. And again, a lot of this is involuntary. Sometimes it's not involuntary. Sometimes you know that you need to communicate in a strong way, and so rather than use your words, you use your eyes, right? Has anybody had the mom or the grandma that would just look at you and you knew you were in trouble? Didn't have to say anything. You just knew from the look that something was very, very wrong. That is kinesics. And by the way, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. We could go deeper and deeper and deeper, but like I mentioned, we're just kind of not skimming over the top, but just hitting these kind of one by one. Haptics is physical touch. So we communicate through physical touch, and that can be affection, that can be hugs, kisses, and otherwise. But a lot of times it's just that touch on the shoulder, that touch on the hand. You are communicating something whenever you touch someone. The picture example here, and if you're not a sports person, sorry, but you can understand the point. This is actually a really old picture, 2010 or 2011. I'm a baseball guy, so that's obviously why that works in here. But the guy on the right is a guy named Mike Maddox. He's a pitching coach in the major leagues, and one of the things that he is known for is when he talks to his pitchers in the middle of a game, he always puts his hand on their shoulder. It's just like one of his things. And so almost every single time you see that he's talking to a pitcher, his hand is on their shoulder. So just like in the example here, he's talking to a guy named CJ Wilson, and he's got his hand on the shoulder. So what is he communicating by always putting his hand on their shoulder? He's not rubbing their shoulder. It's not a physical, oh, your arm looks tired, let me give you a massage. It's not that. What he's doing is he's making a one-to-one connection with them. By touching them, he is drawing their attention. He's saying, I have something to say. And probably more often than not, he's trying to calm them down. So again, if you're not a baseball person, let me just give you the really quick version of this analogy. And I've done some coaching. So typically, when a coach goes out to visit a pitcher, unless he is changing the pitcher and bringing in a different pitcher, what he's going out to do is to either discuss strategy or to give the pitcher an opportunity to take a breath and to calm down. 9 times out of 10, whenever I was coaching, it had nothing to do with strategy. And I coached for a couple of years, high school and middle school. So maybe it's a little bit different when you get to something like the major league level. But when I was coaching high school in particular, almost every single mound visit I ever did was just to walk out and give the pitcher an opportunity to take a breath and to clear their mind, and because they'd get stressed because there were runners on base, or maybe they had given up a couple of runs, or they were struggling with one of their pitches, and their mechanics were off. So I might make a mention about their mechanics, but what I was really going to do was just to walk out, and half the time I would say, hey, where are you going to dinner after this? What do you if you could eat one thing after the game, what would it be? And they would always give me this really weird look. And all I was trying to do was distract them. It was just to, not distract, but just to get them to smile, to take a breath, and to stop being so tunnel visioned about whatever that situation was. So all of that is to say, the job of the coach is not always just to coach strategy. Sometimes it is to actually just get the person to calm down. And that's what Mike Maddox does whenever he puts the hand on the shoulder. It's, okay, take a breath and listen to me. I'm right here. So that is just one example, but we use haptics in a lot of different ways. So physical appearance is another way that we communicate. The way that we look communicates something. So this is the style that we choose. This is permanent physical qualities. And when I say permanent, I mean like things about your face or your hair or things like that. No, those are not technically permanent, you would say, but it's not something that changes every day. So like your clothing changes every day, and you're communicating something different with different clothes. That's a temporary physical quality. But a permanent physical quality would be like your body structure and things like that. So a few years ago, and it's not really quite as big a deal anymore, but a few years ago, there was a thing called the dad bod, and the dad bod became this big phenomenon where, you know, the goal of men for my entire life has been muscles. You want to be muscle bound. You want to have a six pack. You want to have big biceps, big shoulders, whatever. And that's been the goal of men for a long time. And then this trend sort of swept through that said it's cool to have a dad bod. And a dad bod was basically like, I'm sort of fit, but I have a little bit of a gut. And maybe I'm just not super concerned with being really fit. And so why was this such a thing? Why was this so popular? And in particular, what were dads communicating by having a dad bod? So they were communicating a few things. They were communicating, number one, I'm not so concerned with my appearance that I spend a lot of time working out. Okay, so you're communicating that your appearance is not first and foremost, but really, what it was communicating was I have priorities that are more than fitness. So you were communicating this sort of like, I'm relaxed. I'm not worried about what people think. I'm comfortable in my own skin, and I don't really care. So you saw like it was kind of honestly a little bit obnoxious because memes would circulate of like celebrities with dad bods. And you know, I guess we just have this expectation that celebrities are all fit and all, but you know, you would see all of these, like some paparazzi took a, you know, photo of some actor who was like at the beach with his family and had a little bit of a gut, and it was like, so and so has a dad bod. But what they were communicating was that maybe everybody's view of how they look doesn't matter to them as much as, you know, whatever. And typically it comes with a dad. You didn't have to be a dad to have a dad bod, but for the most part, dad bod happens because you don't have as much time to work out. You eat a lot more fast food because you're on the run with your kids, and so your body just doesn't look like it did if you were fit once upon a time. So that was communicating something through physical appearance, and there's a lot of other examples of that as well. That's just one as I'm doing through this. Artifacts are personal objects used to announce our identities or personalize our environments. So let me ask you this: what are 5 things you have on you or with you right now that communicate who you are to people around you? So this can be a little bit of style. Things that you wear might communicate something. If you, let's say you are an athlete at Tennessee Wesleyan and you wear your team hoodie. Okay, that's an artifact. You're communicating that you are an athlete on a particular team. I am married. I wear a wedding ring. That is an artifact because it communicates very clearly that I am married. Now, I don't walk around constantly saying, I am married, I am married, I am married, I am married, I am married. That's obviously unnecessary and silly, but I am constantly communicating that through something on my person, on my body, that is constantly communicating. So there are lots of other things. You might have some kind of fitness watch. You have a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or something like that. That communicates something about your lifestyle and something about who you are. So if we were in person, we might open this discussion up and have a couple people share 5 things that you have on you. We won't do that for the sake of the online class, obviously, but think about how you use objects to announce who you are or to personalize your environment. Proxemics is space and how we use it. there's a whole discussion here of social distancing over the last few years and how it may have changed some of this, where now we use, you can see that there's these levels of space here. So intimate space is 0 to 1.5 feet. If you are within 1.5 feet, you are in my intimate space. You are very, very close. My personal space is that 1.5 to 4 feet. Your social space is 4 to 12 feet, and then public space is 12 feet and beyond. Basically, how do you communicate with people? By how close you are to them. And again, there's a whole element of this of, for a long time, we communicated care and respect by staying 6 feet away from people. We don't have to worry about this quite as much now as we've sort of come into normalcy, mostly again. We don't have to. It's not like a constant. Okay, how far am I away from? Now we're kind of back in the area of when I need to communicate something really clearly, I might get really close to someone. I might get near them. And again, have you ever had some sort of coach or teacher or instructor, or if you were in music, like a band director or somebody giving you lessons, who got really close to you to prove a point? Maybe it was a loud point, and maybe it was a frustrated point, but did they ever get really close to you to prove a point? Or have you ever walked far away from somebody? So let's say you're walking in some sort of area. You're on campus, or maybe you're at a store or something like that, and you don't really want to talk with people. You just want to go about your business. You want to get things, you want to pick up whatever you need from the store, or you just need to get from one class to the other. You use your space to communicate that you are not interested in talking. By staying 12 feet or more away from somebody, what you're saying is, I've got something to do, or I've got somewhere to be, or I'm not really interested in talking. You are using your space to communicate more or less that you don't want to communicate, but you are communicating by how close you get to someone. Environmental factors are elements of a setting that affect how we feel and act. That can be all kinds of different things. The picture here is an example from a TV show called The Office. If you haven't seen The Office, I won't give you too much of an overview. If you have seen some episodes, then you might have at least an understanding of this character. This character right here, his name is Dwight, and Dwight is he's obscure, he's weird, he is kind of a suck up to the boss, and you kind of have moments where you love Dwight, and you have a lot of moments where you really don't like Dwight. But there's an episode where Michael, the boss, believes he's going to be promoted. It ends up not happening, but in the time period where he believes he's going to be promoted, he appoints Dwight as his successor. If you watch the show, he didn't really have any business doing that, but I won't get into all the context of the episode. But one of the first thing that Dwight does the day that he has been named boss is he goes and buys black paint, and he paints the boss's office black. His new office, he paints it black. And you don't really know why he's doing that. And then you see at the end of the episode that Michael, the main boss, comes back because he basically had a terrible interview and he's not going to get the job. So he comes back and he walks in and he says, "Why is my office black?" And he says, "To intimidate my subordinates." Dwight has this very power trip thing throughout the whole series, but he really, really wants to be in charge, and he really, really wants to have power, and he really wants to scare those who are beneath him. And so the first thing he do is he changes the environment of his office to communicate intimidation. So right away he says, the first thing that I'm going to do to assert my power and to assert my control over the office is I'm going to paint my office black. I'm going to make an environment that communicates intimidation. So we use our environment to communicate things. So it may be as simple as if I'm in my office and I don't want anybody to bug me, I'm going to close my door. That is communicating I'm off limits, I'm working, I'm thinking, I'm doing something else, then that is a way that I use environment to communicate versus open door. You hear the term open door policy. That's communicating literally through an open door, but it's also using that term to say, I'm available, I'm open, I want to talk, whatever it would be. That's using our environment. All right, stick with me a few more. I know there's a lot here. I'm just going to hit on a couple of more. We communicate through time, through something called chronemics. So think chronology. Chronology is the telling of a story over time. So that's that root word. Chronemics is how we perceive and use time to define identities and interaction. So this is in a lot of ways very culturally based. If you are from another culture where time is used very differently, then you may have a different context for this. But we use time to a degree to communicate. So there is a book called The 5 Love Languages. It's pretty standard fare in a lot of or a standard read in a lot of cultural contexts and a lot of subcultures and groups. It's really good. It's a really great way to understand people and to understand yourself and to be able to effectively show love and communicate with people. So this is used a lot of times in relationships and a lot of times in marriages and things like that, is understanding how do people give and receive love. And basically the author identifies 5 love languages. Words of affirmation, meaning I affirm people. That's a way that I show love, or I really love to be affirmed, and that's the way that I receive love. And then there's acts of service, receiving gifts, giving and receiving gifts, physical touch, and quality time. Quality time is one of the 5 love languages. So what that's saying is some of us, we give love or receive love through our giving of time. So if, and I'll just use my marriage as an example. If I tell my wife I love her once a day, but I never spend any time with her, does she actually believe that I love her? And maybe she does. And maybe there's seasons where we don't have as much time because work is really busy or something in life is going on, or the kids are sick. And so we don't get a lot of time together because we're taking care of the kids or things like that. But one way that I communicate my love to my wife is by spending time with her. And a lot of times it's not time that has an agenda. It's not, oh, hey, we need to set our watch to, okay, we need to make sure that we're together at 7:00 and that we need to be done by 8:30. That should be a sufficient amount of time for me to show my love. It's not that at all. It's saying, I love you and I want to be with you, and I'm going to set everything else aside because I just want to be with you. And it's not just a marriage thing. You don't have to be married to show your love through quality time. But you may also be a quality time person. You may have relationships where people say, yeah, we're friends and I love you, or we want to be close, but I never have time for you. Then they're probably communicating that they're not really interested in being that close. And here's the deal. We have a limited amount of time. Time is our most finite resource, right? You can earn more money. You can get more stuff, but you can't create more time. You can sleep less, but eventually that's going to catch up with you. So we use time, and we talk about this in one of my other classes, that time is really our currency, is what we really have, and we think through things with how much time is this going to take me, because I value my time. And so if I value my time and I use that time to show my love for others, that's that idea of chronemics, and that's just love. There's other ways that we communicate time. Sometimes we show up for a party late. And you purposefully show up to a party late to make an appearance, right? So everybody else is there. So if you want to be seen and you want everybody to see that you were there, you show up a little bit late because everybody's already there. They're all going to see you walk in the door and you've made an appearance. You're communicating by showing up late. There's also a negative aspect to communicating. When I set a meeting with a student and they show up, a minute or two late, it's like, okay, no big deal. Things happen. But if you show up half an hour late, if you show up 15 minutes late for class, what you're really communicating to me is I don't value your time. We communicate through time. The the last one of these types that I'm going to cover, and I'm trying to go quickly. I could really talk about this for a long time. The last one that we'll talk about, and then we'll just talk about one more thing after that, or a couple more things after that, is paralanguage. Okay, so paralanguage is the vocal communication connected to our words. So that's sounds that we make that aren't words. If we murmur, if we laugh, we gasp, we cough. Vocal qualities like volume, pitch, inflection, and even silence. Silence oftentimes communicates. If somebody talks to you and you give them the silent treatment, you're probably communicating that you are unhappy with them about something. That is a form of communication that's not verbal. That is a nonverbal. Using silence is a form of paralanguage. And this is I think a lot of times what we think of when we talk about nonverbal communication is we jump straight to paralanguage. We jump straight to how loud am I talking? How fast am I talking? How slow am I talking? What are the other elements of my language that aren't just the words? But as you've seen, it's a lot more than that. But this is a lot of times what we jump to first. Okay, I told you I'm going fast. Nonverbal communication is more restricted in digital and online communication. We could spend a long time talking about this because it is, at least in my my own thoughts and time and research, I'm trying to figure out the balance between digital communication and face-to-face communication, and what is effective, what is healthy, and where do nonverbals play into all of this. So this has been an ongoing conversation for decades as online communication tools even started. But now we are just inundated with online communication tools. We communicate digitally all the time. Social media, text, email, Teams messages, Zoom calls, FaceTime calls, and on and on and on. I have easily 15 apps on my phone that all basically do the same thing, that communicate with people digitally. It's honestly annoying. I have my Messages app, I have GroupMe, I have Slack, which is a communication tool, I have Teams, which is a communication tool, I have Google Chat, which is another communication tool. I have if you have WhatsApp, there's another communication tool. If you have I haven't even gotten a video yet, FaceTime, Skype, Google Meet, Zoom, and over and over, they're just everywhere, right? So we communicate digitally like crazy, and nonverbals are, in general, more restricted in digital and online communication. So the way that we fight that, the way that we battle that, is we started these things called emoticons. That was like when you used letter symbols to make smiley faces and stuff like that. Then you have emojis. We still use emojis a lot. Then it was like pictures of ourselves, right? You could actually cartoonify yourself and send that. That's how we use GIFs. We use exclamation points over and over again. We can emphasize, if you've ever, somebody sent you a text celebrating something and confetti pops. That is all forms of how do we get nonverbal communication into our digital communication. So think about this. How do you do this? You do it all the time without realizing it, because very, very little of our digital communication now is just the sharing of factual information. Very, very few of our texts are just, where are you? I am here. Okay. It's conversation now. We're engaging in long form conversation that is asynchronous through things like text or Snapchat or other social media or whatever it would be. And there's an argument now that, as we can see each other on digital communication, that it is providing more nonverbals. Okay, so just think about the difference between a phone call and a FaceTime call. Okay, so there's a phone call has a certain amount of nonverbals. You can hear people's paralanguage on phone calls. But you can't see their facial expression, and you can't see their environment. You can't see the way that they're dressed. You can't see the way that I'm dressed right now. This is a form of digital communication, and so much of that nonverbal communication is taken out, even though you can get my paralanguage. So paralanguage plays a big role in a phone call or something like this, a recorded presentation. But then when you incorporate in things like FaceTime or Zoom or Teams or whatever, all of these different tools that now pull in the video, we've now brought in a little bit of environment and a little bit of facial expression, gestures, things like that. Now, I would make the strong argument that the environmental factor of that is still not very strong, because how often have you positioned your phone call where your background is something nice? There is this commercial, it's not around anymore, it's super old, but there's this commercial of, mom is on a business trip and she's on a FaceTime call with dad and the kids. And it's like mom checking in. So mom's on this business trip and she's checking in, and it's dad, and she's like, how's it going? How are the kids? Is everything going okay? And he's like, yeah, it's great. It's wonderful. We're having a blast. And you see, it's just like the two kids and him in the frame with a nice clean wall behind him. And it's, yeah, everything's wonderful, blah, 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 blah. And then the call ends and it pans out to they're sitting in the living room and the walls are completely covered in like mud and gunk and food. Like the whole house is a complete disaster. And all they had done is just cleaned one square of the wall and made it the background of the video. So it looked like, oh yeah, the walls are clean, everything's great, everybody's doing awesome. But then when you pan out, you see, okay, this environment is something much, much different, much more chaotic. It's a commercial, obviously it's fictional, but that's that idea of, yes, video brings in more nonverbals, but it doesn't bring in all the nonverbals of a face-to-face interaction. So that is an example of something called the media richness theory. I will really quickly hit on, I keep saying I'm going to go faster, I'm trying. The media richness theory is the idea that the nonverbal cues are, the more nonverbal cues that we have, the more rich the communication is, and so the more effective the communication is. This is not rocket science. It's saying that a text message has less richness than a face-to-face conversation, and so the face-to-face conversation is in large part more effective than a text. Now, there are times that a text is perfectly fine. It's not saying that you should always have more rich communication, but what it's saying is the more nonverbal cues that you have, the more rich the communication is. And so understand the environment and the situation. And this is talked about a lot in organizational settings. When is an email sufficient and when does it need to be a meeting? I've been to a lot of meetings that could have been an email, and I've had a lot of email strings that would have been a lot less stressful if we just all got together face to face and worked through it. It's not that one is always better than the other. It's understanding what is the best communication given the environment, and that is built off of how many nonverbals are available and how many nonverbals do we need. That's the very, very abridged version of media richness theory. It's more complex than that, but that's the basic idea. Okay, last slide, I promise. Some ways to improve your nonverbal communication. Monitor your nonverbal communication. This is a hard thing to do, right? Some of it is just knee-jerk reaction, but we can still be conscious and be aware of the ways that we are communicating nonverbally. Be thinking through that. The reason that we talk through this is so you can interpret others' nonverbals well, and so you can be a more effective communicator, both in the giving of nonverbal communication and in the receiving of nonverbal communication. There is a lot of ways that our communication could be improved and could be more rich and could be more satisfying and could be healthier relationships because we are able to better monitor and use our nonverbal communication to communicate effectively.